All right, welcome back, scholars. Again, today's lesson is Unit 6, Lesson 5C. Materials needed for today's lesson are Chapter 5, pages 40 through 41, sheet of paper, pencil, distraction-free location. Now, scholars, it is going to be pretty wise to have Thursday and Friday's notes with you as well, especially when it's time for you to answer your exit ticket. So, scholars, for now, you should have completed your reading of pages 40 through 41 and completed your dirt quiz. If you have not done that, stop and go back and make sure that you have completed your reading and your dirt quiz. So now that we've done all of that, remember, if you have any questions, write them down in your notes. Then visit us in our office hours, 2:15. We also want to hear from you today to let us know how this lesson went. Remember, we're looking for a thumbs up or and it's okay. Be honest with us. We love your honesty. Remember also, we are one big learning family, all here to support each other and grow as learners. And guys, we are really trying to make this virtual experience the best experience ever. We need to go over one vocabulary word today. That word is reckless. What word? Reckless is an adjective. It means of a person or their actions. It's something when someone does something without thinking or caring about the consequences of their action. Again, it means when someone does something without thinking or caring about the consequences of their action. So, scholars, our focus question is still the same. Was Cleopatra to blame for Caesar's death? Again, our focus question is, was Cleopatra to blame for Caesar's death? On your paper, these are your notes that you're writing down. I want you to go ahead, mark today's lesson is lesson 5C. Our focus question is, was Cleopatra to blame for Caesar's death? We are writing that on our notes. All right, and now that we have that down, let's move on. Right, so let's do a quick recap. We've learned a lot from Thursday and Friday. First, we talked about how life was for Cleopatra and Caesar. We talked about it was challenging because of their statuses. Caesar had just come back to Rome as this hero, and we talked about Cleopatra joining him as his special guest. We also discussed that the Romans, they didn't really like Cleopatra and Caesar's relationship because Caesar was already married. Then, scholars, on Friday, we discussed the struggles that Caesar and Cleopatra faced while living in Rome. We talked about Caesar's plan to create a new law so that he could have two wives because he really wanted to marry Cleopatra. We also discussed Cleopatra wanting to stay in Rome because it suited her interests and she didn't care if it made others upset. We also talked about how Caesar built this golden figure of Cleopatra and it made the Romans really upset. And then lastly, we talked about how the Romans questioned Cleopatra's influence on Caesar because Caesar changed the calendar and that took away the priest's power. So today I want you to think about how life was for Cleopatra and Caesar. Also consider the struggles that they faced. Now, our annotation and discussion prompt for today is what happened to Caesar and what happened to Cleopatra. So our only focus for today is explaining what happened to Caesar and what happened to Cleopatra. We're moving. So, scholars, with our annotation and discussion prompts, yes, we need to create a T-chart. Our T-chart today should have a total of 4 boxes. The boxes on the left is simply going to tell us what happened. The boxes on the right is going to give us our evidence. I want you to take this 1 minute, create your T-chart. Be sure to label Caesar equals in one box and Cleopatra equals in the second box. Your minute has started. All right, scholars. So on your screen, you will see my T-chart. I do have my focus question. I have what we're looking for today, what happened to Caesar and Cleopatra. I now have my T-chart ready to go. We should all be set up and ready to go. So now that we have that, yes, it is time for us to read so that we can fill out our T-chart. Scholars, we are at the top of page 40. I am going to read aloud the first 2 paragraphs for you. Now, as I'm reading, I want you to consider these 2 questions. Who killed Caesar and why? Again, I want you to focus on these 2 questions. Who killed Caesar and why? We're at the top of page 40, and I am going, pardon the paper, and I am going to read aloud for you. Remember, we're thinking about who killed Caesar and why. It was only a matter of time before Caesar's enemies in the Senate took action. They resented the level of individual power he had achieved. They could no longer tolerate his reckless behavior with the Egyptian queen. Caesar would have to die. More than 60 men conspired to kill Caesar. They carried out the deed on March 15th, 44 BCE. The idols of March. Caesar's former friends and colleagues, led by 2 senators named Brutus and Cassius, stabbed him to death on the steps of the Senate. According to the historical account by Plutarch, he breathed out his soul through his multitude of wounds, for they say he received 3 and 20. Again, he breathed out his soul through his multitude of wounds, for they say he received 3 and 20. Now, I'm going to give you a few seconds to consider who killed Caesar and why. All right, now that you have considered who killed Caesar and why, let's go in and find our best piece of evidence. Giving you 1 minute. You're finding your evidence. You are abbreviating or paraphrasing your evidence and writing it on your T-chart. The best piece of evidence that will answer why they killed them or who killed them. 20 seconds. All right, and scholars, I am going to share with you the best piece of evidence that I found. At first, I'm answering the why, and my answer to the why is found on page 40, where it says they resented the level of individual power he had achieved. They could no longer tolerate his reckless behavior with the Egyptian queen. I paraphrase it by saying the sinners resented the level of individual power he had achieved. And then when we talked about who killed him or how he was killed, I identified it's in the second paragraph that they stabbed him to death. Now I need to answer the question, what happened to Caesar? Again, we are now answering the question, what happened to Caesar? You're going to write your answer in your box, Caesar equals. You have 1 minute. Let's go. All right, scholars, so let's share what we wrote on what happened to Caesar. I wrote that Caesar was murdered by other Roman senators. Again, I wrote, kept it short, he was murdered by other Roman senators. I want you to take a few seconds, look over your evidence, look over your claim as to what happened. You can revise it, add to it while we set up for our next question. So, scholars, we now need to see what happened to Cleopatra. I am going to read aloud starting at page 40, and I'm going to read parts or sections on page 41. Scholars, as I read, I want you to consider what happened with Caesar's will and why, and where did Cleopatra go and why. Again, I am starting on page 40. We're thinking about what happened with Caesar's will and why. Officials read Caesar's will 2 days after his death. As might have been predicted, it did not recognize Cleopatra. It did not provide for Caesarion either, as he was also considered a foreigner. Instead, Caesar left his estate to Octavian, his great nephew, whom he renamed as his adopted son. Mark Antony, a brilliant general who served under Caesar, took on Caesar's duties as head of state. He had served as master of the horse, Caesar's second in command. So, scholars, I want you to think what happened with Caesar's will and why. Go in, find your best piece of evidence. You have 1 minute. You're going to write that best piece of evidence on your T chart. Let's go. 19 seconds. All right. Now, scholars, I'm going to read the second part on page 41, where it says fleeing back to Egypt. Now, as I read this, I want you to consider, where did Cleopatra go and why? Again, as I'm reading this, I want you to consider, where did Cleopatra go and why? As the Romans chose sides between Mark Antony, Octavian, and Marcus Lepidus, the Republic was once again plunged into a civil war. Cleopatra, now caught in the middle of the conflict without any friends, found herself in extreme danger. Within weeks of Caesar's death, she ran for her life, boarding a ship for Alexandria with Ptolemy XIV and Caesarion. Many were glad to see Cleopatra return to Egypt. The Roman orator Cicero considered her both rude and offensive. He had been one of her most outspoken critics during her stay in Rome. Writing to his friend Atticus, he said, "The queen's flight does not distress me at all." Scholars, take a few seconds. Consider, where did Cleopatra go and why? Now, I want you to take 1 minute, go into the text, find your best piece of evidence. You're going to write your evidence down on your T-chart. All right, scholars, now that you have your best piece of evidence, time to write our claim. You are answering, what happened to Cleopatra? Let's go. Thirty seconds. All right, scholars, now that we have our evidence, we have our claim, I am going to share what I wrote. One, I wrote that Cleopatra was not named in his will, nor was her son, and that Cleopatra was caught in the middle of a civil war and she ran for her life back to Alexandria. Cleopatra equals was not named in Caesar's will and fled back to Egypt. Scholars, go ahead and take this moment, revise, add to your T-chart. Just giving you a few seconds to do that. We're moving. We're moving. All right, scholars. So we are at our lesson recap. So you have 3 days worth of notes. This lesson, we have discussed how was life like for Caesar and Cleopatra in the fall of 46 BCE. We've also discussed the struggles that they faced while living in Rome. And then today, we discuss what happened to Caesar and Cleopatra. So, scholars, you are going to use your notes from the last 3 days to answer the question: is Cleopatra to blame for Caesar's death? Today is an exit ticket, so you must respond using an ACE paragraph. You are to have an argument and claim, give context, offer 2 pieces of evidence, and give an analysis with a hired word. Again, scholars, you're using your notes from the last 3 days to answer the exit ticket prompt: was Cleopatra to blame for Caesar's death? I enjoyed working with you guys. I hope this new form is beneficial for you. I cannot wait to hear from you during office hours. Thank you for all of the grit and grind that you've shown. See you soon.